This House to order, the final round of the Elder Championship. Invite the Prime Minister to speak on a motion that bears her name. Here. 7 minutes. Prime Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you. We believe outside government there's a problem. We think that it is bad that the United States tortures victims, right? They inflict wrongful pain and suffering on individuals without reparation, right? They do this and they inflict this pain and suffering on individuals who are now no longer able to live out their full life as comfortable as they otherwise would. We think this is extremely a huge problem, and while we understand that you cannot make up for this suffering in any way, we do believe that if we can provide money, provide an apology, this is the first step, right? If we can make your life better in any way, then we have a duty to do just that. Again, we don't think that you can make up for the suffering, but we do believe that if you can make the future life of this victim better, that we have a duty to do so. So we're going to define torture as basically just inflicting harm on an individual with the goal to retrieve future information, right? We think that any infliction of pain on individuals is illegal under United States standard, and that's what we're going to define torture as. The model, we're going to give every victim of torture $10,000 every month for the rest of their life, right? We think this is enough for them to be able to live comfortably and pay for any of counseling or whatever that we have caused them to now have in the future. We think that the United States is also going to admit fault and issue a public apology saying that they are sorry and that they have done wrong against this victim, right? And we think that, again, while this may not make up for the pain and suffering, if it helps the victim, victim in their future, then we think that this is something that we should do, because we think when a perpetrator admits fault, when they say we have wronged you, what we did against you was wrong, this is the first step in the healing process for that individual. I'll take it on.
Right, so when you say the United States government is going to admit fault, who exactly are you talking about? Are we going to sort of walk Dick Cheney up there and make him admit fault?
No, the public officials are going to admit that the United States made an error. They were not supposed to do this. They engaged in a legal activity and issue a public statement to the public, right? We don't think that it has to be a specific individual, the public as a whole. Okay, so we think, again, that while we cannot make up for this, that this is a step in the right direction. And we think that the problem is that people are tortured and people are held. Heinous crimes are committed against these people, right? We're literally inflicting pain on people before you've even proven that they're guilty, before you've even proven that they're innocent, because that's what you do when you engage in torture, right? You torture first and then you ask questions later. And we think that these acts, these heinous crimes against individuals without due process, that oftentimes individuals are left with long-term psychological effects that are extremely harmful, right? And we think that without an apology, without being told that, this wasn't your fault, this was us, it was our crime, that without that first step in the healing process, that it's often a lot of time harder for that person to ever be able to live out a normal life, right? And that's why we think that the public apology is key. And we also think that the $10,000 a month, again, is key, because now this individual can live comfortably since we took away so much of their previous comfort, right? And so, again, the cause of this is that the United States feels that it can just do whatever it wants, because there's no check and there's no punishment on this kind of torture, because it's done behind the scenes, because it's done by officials, not so much in the public eye. It's basically they can engage in this illegal activity because there's no repercussions, right? Because after it's admitted that it's wrong, after it's been deemed that it's wrong, or after the torture has been done, there's really no reparations, right? And we think that this is extremely harmful. And we think that by forcing the United States to admit fault and to come to terms with these actions that they've done, this is going to deter future torture in the future. Because now there is a check, now there is something that they need, now there is a check and there is something that they need to come to terms with and admit fault. Because we think that when you admit fault, when you're forced to pay money to your victims, that this ultimately leads to a future deterrence, right? Because now now you have to admit fault and you have to come to terms with what you've done. And we think that, again, the solution to this is admit to the public a public apology, explaining that you were wrong, that what you did was not legal, that was not within the realm of law, and paying the price, paying the monetary value to these people is ultimately going to deter this in the future. And we think that this ultimately leads to a lot of positive things, right? Because the United States prides itself on treating the individuals with dignity, with treating individuals with respect. And we don't think that engaging in this kind of activity is adhering to those values. And so we think that because we respect things like human dignity and basically respect things like human dignity, and we respect things like innocent until proven guilty, that this is not in line with those values, right? And we think that when the United States is forced to admit that they no longer are upholding those values when they do things like this, that they're going to be more in line to want to change those values in the future, because now they have to take this responsibility, right? They have to admit the default. The public now is offered a lot more transparency with the public, right? Because now they have to take responsibility for what they've done. They have to admit fault, and this leads to more transparency and more accountability for the government. I'll take top hat.
Would you agree that torture is wrong?
Yes. That's what we yes, we do agree torture is wrong, and that's why we believe that it should be illegal, it shouldn't be done, and when it is, to these victims, they should be paid a fine and fault should be admitted, like literally saying what we did was wrong, right? That's like the crux of our entire case. So again, we think that victims, although we cannot make up for the pain and suffering, although we cannot somehow make better what's been done, we think that it's important that we try and do whatever we can to ensure that that individual lives out the rest of their life in the most comfortably way possible, right? And we think that the first step to that healing is admitting fault, is getting that public accountability, and is saying that what we did was wrong, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your life, right? We think that it's extremely important that we can do whatever we can to ensure that the individuals who were committed wrongs against can live out the rest of their lives in the right way. And again, we think that this solves because when the United States is forced to acknowledge that they were wrong, to take responsibility, to admit public fault in front of its own residents, in front of basically everyone, right? Because it's going to be public. We think that this is ultimately going to deter them from engaging in future actions that do not align with their values, right? Because we're saying that this does not align with their values. And we think that when you have public accountability, the government is more likely to adhere to what it's supposed to stand by. And for those reasons, we are very proud to propose.
I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for her remarks. Now call upon the Leader of the Opposition to open the government bench. Speech not in excess of 7 minutes. Hear, hear.
Government today and say that, yeah, torture is bad and we shouldn't be doing it. Mainly, not only for the human dignity argument, but for the very argument and fact, any kind of internal investigation into the torture that United States actors have committed against people have proven to generate only inaccurate information that has just led us down rabbit holes. So we think that for that very reason alone, we should be against torture. But what we are not against is the idea of reparations coming out of side government today. We didn't really talk about too much about the Truth and Reconciliation, but we're mainly just basically the idea that you can actually give people something that is going to make torture okay. What my partner was asking in the POI is, are we against torture in this House? And we think, obviously the answer from side government was yes. On side opposition is yes too. Why is this important? It's important because what you hear to the Prime Minister, that it should be illegal, but when it happens there should be a fine. What we think on side opposition today is that we should be taking a harder line stance against torture. No, there shouldn't. A fine is literally, okay, fine, $10,000 a month, $10,000 per month for the rest of an individual's life does kind of sound like a lot, but for the United States government, we have so much money. That is like a teardrop in the enormous ocean of money that the United States has. So this is doing nothing to contradict the inherent power dynamic that the United States has against these individuals, has already taken out against them. And so really what we see here is just an ability for the United States to continue being the strong man in the room, doing whatever the heck it wants in order to, so basically that is why, that's the summary of why we're against this. But we're going to be talking about a few things, mainly the idea that mainly on this idea of a power dynamic, kind of the status quo environment of towards torture in the United States today, and why we don't think that this is actually going to lead, which we think is going to be kind of the weighing mechanism around, is less torture. We think that that is going to be most important, especially because we agree that that is going to be the benefit that we're working towards today. So because we'll be getting that into those points after I take rebuttal, but I'll take front half first.
Yeah, so I think you missed a point of our model where we said that we want the United States officials to actually admit to the public that they did did something wrong. We think that that actually creates the discourse in the public sphere, which leads to actual change in the long run.
Okay, so I'm going to answer that in my point here on the status quo of how like the United States looks at torture today. So currently, we can see actually like a kind of a history of the United States government. Even if we come out with a report that says, yeah, we were guilty in this situation for creating an act, let me remind you, that is illegal under both international law and national law. So when the government has released these internal reports that says, yes, we are guilty, what ends up happening is that the current president or the current higher official in that department will pardon previous people for those actions and start justifying it. So what we think is that, like, when we look and see that Bush, where like after 9/11 was able to like enact a lot of these obviously actions that led to a lot of torture of these people, Obama ended up pardoning him for all of the things that the CIA report was talking about, all of these like unjustified incidents of torture. What we think this like actually does is, even if the United States like government official came up and like we brought Dick Cheney up and he said, oh, I'm like, yeah, I'm guilty, what would then end up happening is really like basically nothing. The symbolism is not there because we're not actually forcing the United States to take responsibility for the actions, because that money, like I said, is literally nothing. It was worth nothing to the United States government. So and also at the point, sorry, there's a professor at Stanford University, Professor Hsu. He's like head of their legal department. He was the one that actually justified for the United States Department why waterboarding shouldn't be counted as torture. If we're going under like this idea that the United States is going to change its mind towards torture, no, that's just not going to happen. We literally work around and create our own legal reasoning for why we should like count some forms of torture as not being torture. And I understand, like, yeah, we're talking about pain and under the definition of side government. I'm just trying to bring up the idea that in the status quo, the United States is not like interested really in the idea of like changing its ways through symbolic acts. And we think that really what this $10,000 per month amounts to is a symbolic act. What we see is that like really we don't care. So what do we think this is actually going to do on if we pass this inside government? What we think this is actually going to do is that because the United States is just inherently like a stronger actor in this situation, because it's going to enter the reparations process and like the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions in a way that's like, no matter what happens, we're going to walk scot-free basically after this. We think that that's not going to actually lead to any actual change. We think that like if we were to come up here and say like we want less torture, side government would have to provide like people are actually going to be tried under like international law. They're going to go to jail for torture. They are going to like personally, individually experience these, experience the repercussions of these actions. The point where you literally walk Dick Cheney out and just say like, I'm sorry, that's nothing. That's meaningless. That especially like it just snubs its nose at the harms that we've inflicted upon these people, which we agree are enormous and will probably carry out for the rest of their lives because of the psychological effects that they've had on them. So because it's perpetuating this idea of like the United States can have control of the situation no matter what, we think that's wrong. And we think that it legitimizes torture as a political tool. We think that if you are not, like as side government was saying, I'll take your point actually, yeah.
Oh, cool, thank you. So when South Africa instituted Truth and Reconciliation Commissions after the apartheid, they didn't do so as a transaction between them and the British to say, this is the money, right, for the apartheid being okay. They did so to declare it as being bad and never happen again.
Okay, yeah, but so what we're saying though is that the United States in the past has not been able to react from these symbolic acts like South Africa has. And if we're talking specifically about the United States and changing how we view torture, we don't think that that's going to work as well on the side of the house. Especially because, I mean, like even if you look at the Japanese concentration camps during World War II, we gave like $20,000 to these people for like 4 years of their life that they literally spent in like a camp for like no justifiable reason. We don't think that like, we think again that this is like a very symbolic act and it's not going to actually change anything. We don't agree with the idea that because of admitting fault, that's going to like lead to any real change. And we don't think that just by giving reparations and Truth and Reconciliation Commissions that you're going to be treating these individuals with any more dignity. And that's like the second point that I haven't really addressed in my constructive speech. We don't think that by saying we can actually make this okay by doing something that's basically meaningless to us, we can make our actions okay in the past. So we think that if that's the case, if A, the United States is not going to change their view on torture, and also because they're not going to change how they treat these individuals during the process, and because we really do strongly believe that it's going to legitimize this as a political tool for the United States to get away with future torture, we are strongly proud, or we are very proud to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you to the Leader of Opposition. Calls on the Deputy Prime Minister now to respond with a speech time in excess of 7 minutes.
I think opposition got it wrong, right? I feel like they think that the problem is the fact that the government views torture as not a bad thing. I think what you will get on side government is the fact that the government doesn't view torture as a bad thing, but doesn't view an individual as an individual. We feel like the government views an individual as an object that they can use to get information from. We think that that is inherently intrinsic to the United States value, and we want to try to get rid of that in the future. We can only do so by showing the public the way that they see. So first, let's get into a bit of rebuttal, and then I'm going into the value of like how the United States actually feels and view people. We think that that'd be like the most important so far in today's round. Let's get into like a little bit of rebuttal. So she brings up like these policies from 9/11 under like Bush, like the Patriot Act, AUMF. But I think the first thing is she neglects the fact that Stensenbrenner, the one who wrote the Patriot Act, come out and made an apology for actually writing it in the first place. Now, what did that actually do? That made the Patriot Act itself lose legitimacy. Now, when you lose legitimacy for a plan that was enacted, you don't actually enact that plan again. Secondarily, if you don't buy that, the public then won't support a plan that didn't work, and even the own actor won't support it later. So I think that when you get public discourse, specifically when the person who made the plan is come out and says that it was wrong, the plan itself loses legitimacy, and the public does not have faith in that plan in the long run. Secondarily, we see that, and ultimately that worked in the status quo, when someone came out and said that it was wrong. They bring up like the Stanford thing and say that like, oh, like, we have to justify like waterboarding, it was effective. We think that that's the problem. And then the problem is that the United States has an intrinsic way of defining individuals as objects, and that they do nothing to actually solve this problem. We think that on our side that we have to bring the light to the public sphere, the ones who elect those officials who make the policies that they say are bad. We say that that is the way that we enact change. We enact change by changing the status quo, not just saying, oh, it's bad, not fixable, so let's not do anything under our position. Finally, they say that like we have no interest in doing so. We've tried, but haven't been successful. We say that we have tried. Like I gave you the example of Patriot Act, but if you don't believe the example, you have to look at just how the fact that social change happens when people don't agree with the government. Specifically, like when you look at like Ferguson, why that happened? The government itself was in question. It was the legitimacy of the government in question, and because of that question, we see that there's more investigation, specifically with like the DOJ, which led to actual change and future progression. It's not when it's hidden, right? So we see that more things are actually problematic when things are hidden, and that they say that we need to continue hiding torture. We say we bring the public light, not only by giving them money, but by issuing an apology to those, and to the entire United States, and to the individual who's affected by torture itself. Go.
Okay, so that's completely incorrect. I never said to hide torture. I actually explicitly said that we should take this matter to the individuals who okayed this, so that there are actually like real repercussions for these people, so people don't have this symbolic understanding of torture.
Okay, we can do that too. I don't think it's mutually exclusive. On our side, we can put them in jail and issue a public confession. We think that's mutually exclusive. We get that on our side too. So let's move on to like some public matter, some positive matter. I have like a lot to go on. So we have this view in the United States government that the human is an object that gets them votes, or it allows them to do things that they need. And we think that this is intrinsic to the United States government specifically. We see this with like government, like military policy, right? When we say we enact things like the AUMF, which is like 55 words that defines who is a terrorist and who isn't a terrorist. And why are we able to use things like this, and why we enact these things in the first place, is because we don't view the individual as an individual, but rather an object and a classification of set traits. We think that that is an intrinsic to the United States, and something that needs to be broken because it allows a justification of things like torture, because that individual is an object, it is a classification of traits, but not a personality or someone that is important to the society. Secondarily, we see that the only way that you get change in the long run into a better society, a society where we want to actually have values of constituents, where we want to value every vote, is by actually legitimizing that actor as an individual and not as an object. When we see that when people start enacting policies towards objects and not people, they don't enact the policies that are best fit for those individuals, which is exactly why like torture is legitimized, right? Because the torture is supposed to be like for this like helping the public, but it's really not helping the public. It's torturing the individual who they justify because there is an object. Secondarily, we think that the best way to actually solve this is to bring it to light. Now, what you get in specifically a society where it upholds democratic values, you get a society where when people don't like something, the government itself is forced to change, and if it doesn't change, the people don't like it and don't follow the rules. We see that that is specific with like Ferguson, right? The Ferguson example is people did not like the decision. Whether it was just or not does not matter in today's debate, but the fact is we're using this example to show why when people don't like something that has happened in the government, A, they don't feel like they have the right to follow the rules because the government government itself aren't protecting them, and B, the government itself loses legitimacy and can't enact sequential the same plans in the future. This ultimately is exactly how we solve for like ultimate torture on our side. We say that by bringing the discussion to the table, by not hiding it like they try to say that will happen like status quo solves, by not hiding it, pushing it aside, we think that by bringing it to the face value, saying that we've made a mistake, saying that look, we value humans as not objects but as individuals, not only are we willing to give them capital, we are willing to say that we've done something wrong, and even if she wants to go about it, we'll put that person into jail. I think that it doesn't matter like what we do to that individual. The fact is, the public needs to know what is going on, and that is what is the greatest effect, and how you actually solve for this in the long run. So ultimately, we see that a society that views an individual as an individual has better policy, right? So we have better policy because they think of individuals as the individual and not an object that needs to like go about their day. And when you tailor policies towards individuals and towards the caring and how they feel, we think that ultimately those are better policies in the long run and better for things like torture and don't degrade human value and lead to even like worse abuse of policy before times ends.
Is torture effective?
Yeah, okay, so I think torture isn't effective. There's many other ways to do so. And I think what's really key is the fact that we define torture, and most of torture happens before any kind of conviction is actually made, right? Torture is a way to get information out, and that's not even making any any assumptions on whether that person is actually innocent or guilty. That's before any of that happens. So you're viewing the individual as an object to gain information from, and that is inherently flawed, and that is inherently something that a government cannot run itself off of. So you must bring this to the public. What do we give you on side government? We give you a model that actually enacts change. We get that on side opposition, you want to sit there and just watch as torture continues. We tell you that by bringing to light to the public eye, that you get social change, because social change is the only way you get change in a government, because they feel that they have to enact things for their constituents. So ultimately, on side government, we don't sit and wait till torture is abolished. We sit and change and hope for people to advocate once it is introduced into the public eye. So therefore, I'm proud to propose.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for your remarks. Now call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition to close out the top half of the debate with the speech not in excess of 7 minutes. Here,
Ladies and gentlemen, there is an inherent contradiction inside government's argumentation here today. They claim that torture should be illegal. They claim torture is reprehensible. They claim that torture is not effective. And yet they say, but when it is done, reparations must be paid, truth and reconciliation commissions must be set up, and this is the solution to the problem. And we on side opposition, while agreeing with them on the fact that torture is bad, torture is reprehensible, and torture needs to be abolished, we don't think that by simply paying reparations or by simply setting up truth and reconciliation commissions, you are actually deterring anything. Because, ladies and gentlemen, and quote unquote, what they just said, what the previous speaker just said, is that we won't wait until torture is abolished. We will try to do something before that. And what they want to do is inspire social change, and how social change will ensure that in a democracy, such a government will no longer prevail. But one, ladies and gentlemen, reports of torture and information about torture is only released after the entire event or the entire incident has taken place. To that particular government which has enacted these forms of torture may no longer be in power. So what you're essentially doing is not holding your government accountable for holding some past government or some past individual accountable. And three, ladies and gentlemen, what they're doing is commodifying pain, and they're legitimizing torture. And all of these things is what is wrong with their resolution, ladies and gentlemen. And they also have a very wrong idea of what is legal or illegal in this country. Yes, it violates international laws, but the Patriot Act legalizes torture for the CIA and Homeland Security under the status quo. And that is also something that side opposition wishes to change today. It needs to be completely abolished from the American governmental fabric. And because we agree with them, and we also, side opposition, claim that torture is not effective, that in this current day and age, torture is a medieval method of extracting information. You have other psychological ways of extracting information that do not directly inflict pain to the individual under question. You have subliminal extraction of information that does not inflict direct pain to the individual. We think that by abolishing torture completely and by holding these particular individuals accountable, that you can only bring about change. But you seem to disagree.
Yeah, torture is illegal in the status quo, but people still engage in it. What we're saying is that because it still happens, this model works as something to deter future torture by making the United States admit fault. That's how you get change. The status quo, torture still happens.
Clearly, you haven't been paying attention when I said the Patriot Act enables the CIA and Homeland Security to engage in torture. It isn't as if they're acting against their constitution when they engage in torture. It is because the constitution allows them to engage in torture that they're acting in that manner. And that is something we are strictly opposed to. And more importantly, they also think that somehow reparations and Truth and Reconciliation Commission, as I've said earlier, will bring about positive change, but it does not. One, this will only happen after the entire event has taken place, so nothing of significance will happen to the government in question. Two, you claim that an entire government must be held accountable when only certain individuals are taking decisions in that case. And three, they claim that social change is the answer, when social change is not the answer under status quo. After the CIA report was released and after brutal acts of torture committed under the Bush regime were released to the public sentiment still held sway with the American government, because they believed that what the American government did was in their interest, and they believed that it was in the interest of their security, and therefore they did not in any way oppose these acts of torture or bring about any social change that they seem to think. That example about a Stanford professor who tries to legitimize waterboarding was used particularly in this context because people in the United States do not care. People in the United States think waterboarding is not torture. People in the United States think acts such as that are in their best interest, acts such as that are in their interest of security, and because of this reason, because they deem their security above the pain that is inflicted upon the individual, we think that that is wrong, and that is something that side opposition here is completely opposed to. So what do we have from side opposition here today, ladies and gentlemen? Not only does side government commodify pain by paying $10,000 a month for the entire year, and not only do they enable the United States government to continue to be a strong man in these relationships, where you have a power relationship wherein the United States will continue to act and continue to engage in forms of torture and legitimize it by paying money and by admitting guilt, both of which are only symbolic measures, both of which do not actually inspire any positive change, and both of which, ladies and gentlemen, are regressive and medieval in nature, especially given that torture is no longer necessary to extract information. In fact, large numbers of studies have shown to you that in a majority of cases, torture is ineffective. When people aren't being able to extract information through all of these extensive methods or an extensive variety of torture techniques, then what is the point? You're simply inflicting pain when you could be doing other things to extract this information, and you're simply exhibiting your power and your hegemony over the global geopolitical scenario by continuing with this resolution and continuing with torture. So side opposition has shown to you that not only does this resolution commodify pain, legitimize torture, and also prove ineffective, but it also showed to you how under the status quo, which they will continue, wherein the Patriot Act continues to legalize torture for the CIA and Homeland Security. And what is more important is this idea that side government believes is that reparations and Truth and Reconciliation Commissions are not mutually exclusive with what we are proposing. They are mutually exclusive in the sense that when the actor in itself is the United States government trying to regulate itself, we don't think that can solve any problem, ladies and gentlemen. When the United States government will try to admit guilt in cases of wrongdoing, what will likely happen is that there will be mass cover-ups. Individuals who are directly responsible will not either reach the limelight or reach public forums, or what will happen is the current government will pardon the previous government, which in any case does not bring about any change. So given that all of these problems exist, and given that side of opposition here today presents to you a plan wherein you not only hold the particular individuals who are responsible and also illegalize torture for the CIA and Homeland Security, we think the side opposition wins this debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'll call upon the member of the government to open the back half of the debate with a speech not in excess of 7 minutes. Hear, hear.
All right, thanks, Tom. Thank you, everyone. So on the back half here of the government side, we're going to be the team that I think gets you to support us because we're going to talk specifically about what Truth and Reconciliation Commissions are, when they've worked, why they work, and why we should do them in America. We're not going to tell. What we are going to also accept from the opposition side is that we shouldn't probably be putting these people in jail. Why? Because then they wouldn't tell us everything, right? If we told them that we were going to put them in jail immediately after, they're not going to tell you everything they did because they are already hiding it up, right? They're already covering it up. They're not going to tell you. We think that the long-term goal here is, and what you actually achieve out of Truth and Reconciliation Commissions and why you do them as a society is not specifically to punish those individuals, because opposition, you're totally correct, right? Like those people are going to leave. Those people are going to die. And yeah, and what goes on? Society keeps moving forward and our norms keep developing. We think that is what's important. We think on our side of the house, on back half, we're going to tell you that Truth and Reconciliation facilitates the growing norm of ethics in war, which was, we think, something that we should be discussing. We think we should never be using torture again. So let me get into what our extension is on our side of the house. We think that Truth and Reconciliation Commissions promote cultural growth and peace between different ethnicities, between the United States and Middle Eastern nations, and between the American population and Arabs and people in the Middle East. So let's talk about why this is. Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, particularly, are so, like, they're not truth tribunals. Truth tribunals are when you bring somebody up and then you punish them for the things that they say, right? Like, Truth and Reconciliation Commissions are to get somebody up, tell them that you will give them, like, amnesty, right, for what they say, but the goal of the entire operation is for them to tell you everything that happened, right? To tell you what happened over there in the Middle East that the population doesn't know about, because the population wants to know about these things. Why do we want to know about those things? Probably because there's a large population of Islamic people in the United States that are experiencing xenophobia, and the Americans don't understand why they're so pissed off at us, right? Maybe it's because we tortured their innocent populations, right? Like, do you ever stop and think that maybe we are, like, slightly a cause of proliferation of terrorism around the world? That's probably one of the main contributors when they can point to the fact that they see their cousins coming back with, like, missing arms, right? Because they've been tortured, or, like, can't breathe properly and they die within the next year. Sure, Steve.
So a huge tenet of TRCs is remorse. Do you think that people like George Bush and Dick Cheney are remorseful, or are they instead working from a utilitarian platform?
I think they are remorseful. I think they did make the difficult decisions. I think they said, you know, we need to have terrorism because we need to save lives, or not terrorism, we need to have torture because we need to save lives, and this is the best way to do it. I think now they realize, after reports came out, that number one, that information was faulty, and they probably would regret it for that reason. Number two, we think it also degraded the cultural ties between the American populations and the Middle Eastern populations. Number three, I think it proliferated terrorism within the area. So we do think on our side of the house, Mr. Speaker, that torture is in general bad. We think torture has harmful consequences throughout the world, both for the nation that is acting, that is doing the torture, and also for the nations that are experiencing them. For obvious reasons, we think like terrorism proliferates, people support terrorism more, insofar as terrorists can claim that what the U.S. is doing is violating dignity and like cold hard truths like that. But what do we also think, Mr. Speaker, going forward? We think that the lasting peace that we need to have, right, needs to develop in order for us to stop having conflicts in the Middle East. And insofar as we are continuing to develop American hatred in the Middle East, we don't think we're going to have lasting peace, Mr. Speaker. We think when you violate ethics in war, right, like watch Game of Thrones, they're never going to have peace again because of what they've done in war, right? When you kill these people in war and you get your means that way, you're never going to have a lasting peace. You're always going to have this like Hobbesian world where everyone's trying to kill one another. We don't think that's something that you should be doing. We think that torture in the long run is very harmful to the society. But let me get back into and adjudicating what the opening house have talked to you about. We think that they come up here and they talk to you about, and opening goes does a great job about presenting of how torture is harmful, right? Of what torture's effects do and what truth and reconciliations and reparations will achieve, right? At least it will get something for the individual, right? They'll say that we'll get some money for that individual. At least they can have some sort of life after torture, right? After being, committed harmful acts of their human dignity, against their human dignity. What we tell you on back half is that we solve for the community relations, right? We solve for the long term. We solve for the long-term stability of relations between the American populations and between the Middle Eastern populations. We say that we acknowledge that what we have done is bad. We say that we've had some fault in the process. And we think truth and reconciliation commissions are the best way to do that, because those people go up on stand and they say their piece, and they know in their heart that probably, they probably do have some remorse when they go up there and have the detail about how they smothered these like people with just dozens of naked bodies on one another in Abu Ghraib, or they force these people to I don't know. I don't want to get into the details. It's pretty inhumane. Sure, I'll get into
Okay, so at the point though where the status quo literally doesn't care about the torture and how it harms these people, at the point where on your side you're going to give people amnesty and literally give them barely any money from the U.S. government anyway, how is this actually a deterrent, and how is it going to actually increase community relations?
Okay, so on that point, I think it's really important. Thank you. So we think that the Department of Justice right now has some sort of or at least the president had some sort of legal basis for this torture. He sent lawyers in to see what exactly they could do. That's why they call it enhanced interrogation, right? They said what we were doing was exactly legal. We put legal teams on it, right? It's pretty messed up when you have to put 20 lawyers onto something that you're going to do in the first place. But insofar as they did find some sort of legal loophole, we do think that the laws in the end are going to be shored up right after these Truth and Reconciliation Commissions happen, because people realize that what did happen might have been a loophole, right? And the congressmen should just come out and say that these are things that we cannot do, right? The populations will be listening to these Truth and Reconciliation Commissions and understand what has happened over there, right? What our soldiers have been doing to their populations, to individuals who are terrorists or not. Those violations of dignity are not something that we should be supporting. And it's when we're trying to promote freedom and dignity around the world, right? When we use unethical means to achieve our end, I don't think we win in the end. And so, in the long term, though, Mr. Speaker, what have we brought to you on back half today? We think that Truth and Reconciliation Commissions and reparations are ways for us to achieve peace in the long term. We think they're ways, at least, to give someone some sense of consolation for something that may have happened to their family member, or to their culture, or to their religion, like Islamophobia. We think that's a real thing in America, and we think that those things are perpetuated as far as we believe that Islam is some sort of violent religion. When we recognize that we have also committed crimes, that the American population, the American soldiers have gone and done very heinous acts in Abu Ghraib, we think we're going to start realizing that, hey, we're also bad people. We should start understanding one another. When they claim that our soldiers occupying their nations is not something that they want, it's not something that's good for them, maybe we'll understand that we're not like the white liberators from the West. We're actually harming them. We think in the future we're going to have more peace. We're extremely proud of our votes.
Thank you. Member of government, now call upon the member of the opposition to respond to speech time in excess of 7 minutes. Here.
Who are we? The opening government clarified that we are the federal government of the United States of America. The federal government of the United States of America was the institution that dropped the atomic bomb, the only one in the history of the United States. The one that allowed Japanese internment, the one that has pursued a policy of torture for who knows how long, because it has to. The reality of the situation, if we're not just some liberal debaters in college looking at the issue how we'd like to, if we're looking at this as the federal government of the United States, the reality is torture is good. Torture is something that when push comes to shove, it's something that we absolutely have to do. And we need to view realistically and not from the perspective of something other than the realities of our country. So from the opening half, we got two things that I'm going to ingrain. And that's the nature of the individual. How should we treat the individual, the terrorist in this case, and that we legitimize torture through recognition. Those are both going to be ingrained. The thing that's harder to say than acknowledging fault in this case is the truth. And the truth is that as the United States of America, we allow a hypocrisy. We don't treat people outside of our country with the same rights that we treat people inside of our country. That we will do absolutely anything to defend our country. And the thing that is not necessary is torture. So the one thing that we can, the one thing that we can know is that, as we've heard already, there's no lasting peace. We will never have a world where peace goes on indefinitely. It hasn't happened in history, and it won't happen yet because that's how we are. That's how we are as humans. We have faults. We have people who go into groups and countries, and they will fight. And when they fight, they'll have conflicts, and there will always be people who are enemies of the United States. And those enemies will do anything they can, and the rhetoric, even if there's no rhetoric, the policy will always continue that we will do anything we can. Torture is a legitimate technique if it works at all, and that's why we'll continue it. It absolutely does work. The 2 points I'm going to get into are also expanding on the nature of TRCs, and the TRCs should only happen from a place of remorse, which doesn't apply here. The nature of TRCs. And second, that torture is necessary, and we shouldn't shed light on it through this motion. First off, TRCs can only happen if there's remorse. I think the government came up here and lied to you, or at least is ruefully optimistic that Bush and Cheney have remorse for what they did. If you read the autobiography of the president at the time of the Philippines, that was another horrible thing we did. We invaded the Philippines, but we did it because it was necessary. These presidents don't have remorse, and the public doesn't have remorse, and we've heard that too. That we should try to change public opinion. Why? Why should we do that for the federal government of the United States? Neither of these are remorseful, so we're not fulfilling the function of a TRCs. We're lying, and it's a temporary act that doesn't address the reality of what we will continue and what we need to do. We would, if we view the cost-benefit analysis of torture, we would do it again every time because it's not an objective, logical or rational calculus. The calculus is, does it do anything, and is that anything necessary? The anything will always be necessary, which is information that can help us pursue those who are enemies of our country, and we will do it time and time again. So I'd like to compare, near the end of my time. So the best example of TRCs were in South Africa, where we had a majority population being oppressed by a minority, and the purpose of TRCs in that situation was to allow for that pluralistic society. It was internal, the nature, it allowed one group to forgive the other group and move forward because they had to. They had a need to forgive, to move on and do their function. We don't have that need. As we invest in our military, as we continue the policies that define us as the federal government of the United States of America, we will continue to pursue, as I said, whatever is necessary. We don't have, even if we like to think that the torture mechanism is wrong or it makes us uncomfortable, we have no need to function without it later. We won't dissolve as a society or government by continuing torture. I don't think that's shown, and I don't think that could be shown. And my other thing is that for South Africa, it allowed a political change of administration, which doesn't apply here. We're not trying, it's unrealistic to think that we could move from Bush and Cheney, which were like the only ones that allowed something like this, to another administration that would look things differently, that know that if there's some kind of accountability from the public, because of course the public always keeps its mind and focus in one place, that it won't happen again. War will always continue. The need for torture will always continue. The second thing I want to get into in about a minute is why is torture always necessary, and we don't want to shed light. Like I said, the interest will always exist, and we have to be comfortable, we have to acknowledge in this situation our hypocrisy, that our enemies have fewer rights than our citizens. And that's the philosophy behind this policy, but it's not bad policy because it's the only function that's necessary, which is gathering intel that has any measurable effect. And even if it doesn't have any measurable effect, if it did in the past, we'll keep on continuing it until it does. Briefly, I want to address something before that they said that there's other mechanisms besides torture that will be effective. That's just not, torture is effective for one, but those other mechanisms, of course they pursue those first, but they don't always work, just like maybe torture doesn't always work, and that's why we move on to torture. Very quickly. Beth.
Cool. So as your opening half told you, torture is pretty bad because it generates bad information. We agree with them. Also, we think it breaks down community. We think it breaks down ties between populations, which never allows for peace development.
Yeah. It's not bad. The victim of torture might say it's bad, but the federal government of the United States will not say it's bad because it pursues a function. We do get intel from it. And in terms of the isolation from the Middle East, Well, that conflict exists. The best way to move on from that is to not put what I was getting to, not shed light on this and impose backlash both in foreign policies and from some groups at home. What we need to do is internally be comfortable with our hypocrisy and move forward. Draw as little attention to it as possible and pursue the policy that allows us the security of being the United States of America. It's a legitimate tool, and that's why we should continue to do it. The last thing I want to talk about is that the thing that the United States wants to do the right thing, that this is something we need to project. I agree it's something that we need to project, but it doesn't mean that means that has to be true. Nations will not forgive us from what has happened in the past, and we should just know that moving forward. So to review what I've told you, torture, as the federal government of the United States, has efficacy. It achieves something, and that's why we'll always pursue it, because our job is to protect our citizens. This is a different situation from South Africa, and that's why TRC doesn't have any function purpose within its normal function. We will not be remorseful, and we would do it again, so it doesn't make sense to use TRC as a measure. And then I've explained to you why torture is necessary. For all these reasons, we're proud to oppose.
We're here.
Thank you very much. Now call upon the government whip to close out the government bench in today's final round. Hear, hear.
All right, Mr. Speaker. So here on the closing government, we're going to close this out with two general questions that are going to kind of surmise the debate and kind of explain why we've won and why the opposition skews the shit out of us. So basically, the two questions we're going to ask is basically, should we torture people? And second, who best promotes peace? And I think we're going to do a good job of explaining to you how we do that on the side of government, right? So what you get from the top of the debate, most of the debate is, how bad is torture and how should we fix torture and what's the worst thing about torture, right? And so you get from the opening opposition that they are against torture, but that, reparations aren't going to solve it. We think that what reparations symbolically stand for are acknowledging the harms that we have produced, right? We acknowledge the problem we have, we acknowledge that we're wrong, and we acknowledge that we are going to take steps to make it so that it doesn't happen again. We're going to acknowledge to take steps. We cannot promise that we will completely eradicate anything, but we acknowledge that there is a problem. We acknowledge that we are going to move forward as a nation, and on this side, we think that we stand for the entire universe and the nation of progression. We stand for change. We stand for motion forward. Not yet. Right? And so then we kind of get into more of a debate of what is torture and how it gets into, and I think the biggest problem that we have here is the issue of Islamophobia. The issue of making it so that the United States, or whoever we are the most important under any circumstances, and that other human beings do not matter because of their geographical location, right? We think that is inherently wrong, and we think that human beings all over the world, regardless of what they believe or think or look like, matter, right? And I think that's what we stand for, and that's what we can prove to you. And so let me bring to you some of the harms of torture, and before I do that, I will take your question.
Okay, yeah, so on the fact that side government hasn't actually dissected my argument about the status quo and how symbolism actually hasn't worked, and the point where you're not creating a deterrent through amnesty and the fact that this isn't a lot of money, why actually are you solving for less torture on your side?
Okay, so she says that amnesty doesn't support these things. She says that truth and reconciliation courts don't work. She says that these different types of reparations don't work subjectively, because I say that when you sit in a chair, you don't actually feel comfortable. You say that whatever subjective isn't the reality. But we say that in different situations and whatever we've done, we take steps toward progression. We are the side of making change. We are the side of proving differences, right? And what they bring you is no, it doesn't. And then that's it, right? So we're bringing you something more. We're bringing you change. We're bringing you a difference, and we're bringing you reconciliation. We bring to you proof that there is going to be some remorse. There is going to be reconciliation. There is going to be some repercussions for what we've done, and we stand against it. So what actually happens when torture happens and when we do torture, right? There are a lot of harmful consequences of torture, and contradictory to what closing opposition believes, it doesn't really work, because if you hold fire on my head, I will say whatever you want me to say, right? And I think that stands for everybody here in this room, right? And so we think that what torture does is it violates our goal to promote freedom and dignity, right? What we stand for in the United States is dignity, is individual rights, our human rights, our human, the fact that human life matters. We were well, human life only matters if you're from here. Like, your life doesn't really matter if you're from somewhere else. And we totally negate that claim. We think that regardless of where you're from, your human life matters, right? We think that this proliferates terrorism because we are being torturing someone is an avenue of how you terrorize someone, right? We think that just because the people that we are terrorizing are brown doesn't make it so that it's not terrorism because we have an American flag over the candle we're burning on their face, right? Or because we're waterboarding them, right? We think that it's still terrorism, and you don't combat terrorism with terrorism, and I think that's something we can all agree for, right? And then we say that this destroys relations and the way that our populations work. We think that we are not actually furthering global change. We're not furthering any economic relations, any cultural relations. We're just proliferating different cultural problems that we have, our global relations economically, socially, and the way that we interact with the entire world, right? And we think that it promotes xenophobia. In the root of ourselves and what we believe that people are inherently bad for being from somewhere else and believing in something else, that we have no idea why they would think that way about us, right? Like, there has to be some point of self-awareness here, where we understand that we are perpetuating a problem, and we are not going to solve that problem ever, regardless of what closing opposition tells you, by continuing to do that, to perpetuate that problem. We think that this generates bad information. We don't think you gain anything from terrorism other than like some weird masculinity complex of like illness, right? And we don't think that we actually help anyone in any form, right? They said that we need to do this. We need because we're Americans. That's why. Well, what do you actually gain from terrorism? Like, how many people have you actually saved by killing all these other people who just piss off and like let them go? Or like, oh my God, my son's missing. Like, we're even more upset, right? Like, you don't solve anything on your side, but you disagree on the fact.
Right. So if torture actually does produce tangible benefits that save American lives, would that be okay under your guys' plan?
You know what? No. Because we negate that entirely. We think that there are a lot of other ways to get the information that you need to get, right? Like, we think we have, like, psychology. We think we have, like, ways to understand the human thought and the way that people work, right? Like, we don't think that we're apes who have to waterboard someone to get them to say what we're telling them to say, like, read this paper here. Oh my God, he admitted it, right? Like, we don't think this solves anything, right? And so we think that the second question that I think we're going to answer here and how we win this debate is who best promotes international peace. We think that we do that by acknowledging that we all as human beings are in a global community that includes all of us, that has us all as a part, right? Like, what the top half tries to tell you is like, this isn't a good enough plan because it isn't the right plan because it's not. That's it, right? Like, we tell you, like, we're bringing you some more, we're bringing you something, we're bringing you steps toward a difference, right? We're bringing you human dignity, we're bringing to you individual rights. We're not saying we're going to kill you because we're Americans, because we can, right? And we don't think that it's right. We think that what we bring you is social change, we bring you global peace, we bring you human dignity. And we think that the opposition hasn't done anything to combat that. They just said that our plan for human dignity isn't right enough. Right? And we think that what we bring you is some type of solvency, some type of remorse, some type of reparation for the wrongs that we've done as Americans. We think that top opposition doesn't actually solve any problems either, that they're like blaming us for not solving. And then we think that the bottom half of opposition is batshit crazy. And for these reasons, we urge you to vote for the government. Thank you.
Okay, back to the crazy.
Thank you to Government Whip. Now call upon the Opposition Whip to close out the final round of the debate. Here.
Right. Mr. Speaker, my partner put it better than I possibly could have. And there's a realization that there's a hypocrisy that exists with everybody. And it is, you get an icky feeling when things need to be done. Yet when those things need to be done, we shame the people who need to do them. We're okay with whatever means is necessary so long as we are protected. We're okay with military campaigns in the Middle East as long as we don't have to pay over $4 a gallon. We're okay with whatever is necessary so long as our lives are not intruded upon. Yet, when the people are willing to take the steps necessary in order to ensure that safety, ensure that peace, we're going to condemn them. Now, we're not up here saying torture is good. We're not up here saying torture is in any way going to be beneficial to the person that's receiving the torture. What we are saying is that there are tangible benefits that come from torture. There are tangible benefits that come from the information that is received from torture. And that the side of government may believe that they can stand on their pedestal. But, again, they fall into the same hypocrisy as everybody else. That they're willing to buy into a system that has military campaigns that kill people, yet they don't bat an eye until it's shoved in their face. We're okay with these sorts of measures. But again, government is complacent. I'm going to talk about 3 things to summarize this. One, how torture is effective, dispelling this notion that it isn't. Two, how a show of remorse will serve as a mechanism to hamstring government intervention that is necessary. And third, why utilitarianism is the most important thing to operate under in the military. My partner talked about all of these things. So let's get into the first one, how torture is effective. You see, because something has happened recently where people have started to torture more, especially in the United States of America. And the question becomes, why has this occurred? The closing government says, look, we're going to treat people like people regardless. We're going to say that at the point where they pose a threat, at the point where they are going to threaten American lives, they've lost that right. They have lost that right at the point where they become homicidal. They've lost that right at the point where they're willing to sacrifice human lives in the name of a god, in the name of an ideology, or what have you. And you know what? There are instances, Mr. Speaker, when we get it wrong. There are instances when we catch the wrong person. But on the whole, if that means that our troops aren't ambushed because we got information from this individual as to when they're going to attack us, if that means that we can have successful military campaigns in order to ensure the continued safety of the United States of America, you know what? We're comfortable with that on closing opposition. And it's unfortunate that the rest of this debate doesn't understand the importance of these military campaigns. Right? Because let's talk a little bit about what a hamstrung military actually looks like. Because what they're proposing here is that every time the military does something a little messed up, or in this case, pretty messed up, we're going to continue to provide the accountability. We're going to continue to force them in a way to stop doing these sorts of crimes. But a hamstrung military, Mr. Speaker, is one that is ineffective. It is one that is constantly worrying about its next move for fear of repercussions. And what does that actually entail? A military that cannot successfully operate in the sort of secrecy that it needs to operate under is one that costs American lives. May they be soldiers or may they be people back at home. If you ask everybody in this room, would you have tortured the people who were involved with 9/11? Everybody would have said yes. Everybody would have said yes for the preservation of those thousands of American lives. If that means that we have to sacrifice one individual, we think that that's absolutely necessary. We think that's something that's absolutely okay on our side of the house. Because a hamstrung military, Mr. Speaker, is something that the United States can simply not afford at this juncture. With so many threats being posed, not necessarily because we are bad people, but instead because of the ideologies that we believe. Because we believe in freedom. Because we believe in freedom of expression, freedom for women, freedom for religion. That is why they attack us, Mr. Speaker. And that's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that they pose such a large threat. But at the point that they do pose that threat, it is the responsibility of a government that is ensured by the people to provide whatever mechanism is necessary to continue to provide that safety. That is the responsibility of a government first and foremost. At this point, what government is saying is, we're only comfortable with safety if other people aren't harmed. That's not the reality of the world, Mr. Speaker. Back out.
But if you keep tarnishing the image that people have of America in the Middle East, Steve, you're never going to be able to leave there, and your troops are going to continuously be fired off.
No, that's just not how this is going to work, right? We believe in endgames. We believe that through enough information, absolutely, it is possible in order to stop the sorts of things that are existing. Final point, why utilitarianism is most important in the military. You see, because a military that is consistently being checked by the public is one that oftentimes the public cannot necessarily stomach. It's the truth and the reality of the situation. And it's okay. It's okay for people to be uncomfortable with these notions. It's okay for people to not necessarily like the idea of torture. It is okay that we may not necessarily have the backs of the military members that are willing to do the things that are necessary. But it is not okay to then condemn those people who are willing to fight and ensure that continued safety. It is not okay to parade people up there and say, for the things that you are willing to do, for the things that make us sick sometimes, you are being condemned. And that, Mr. Speaker, is not something that we can stand for on closing opposition. We think that at the end of the day, a military must act in a utilitarianism manner, because that is all that it has left. That's the only mechanism that it can truly utilize in a way to be effective. If that means that we must sacrifice one for the larger good, then that is the way that the military must operate. Because what's the alternative, Mr. Speaker? The alternative would be to continue to try to foster good feelings, hugs and kisses for everybody involved, and not actually promote some level of solvency. And in this case, solvency looks like torture. Solvency looks like military campaigns. Again, my partner put it best. The greatest hypocrisy that we face is believing that we don't have threats. The greatest hypocrisy that we face is believing that our military isn't willing to go to extremes to make sure that people are safe. See, because we rest well at night with the mentality that we are safe, that there are no imminent threats. Yet when people are willing to make sure that there are no imminent threats, we condemn them. And it's a shame. Again, at the end of the day, a utilitarian military, like my partner told you, is one that is going to provide solvency, that is going to provide effectiveness. And at the end of the day, when people pose a threat, when people are willing to even affiliate with those that pose a threat to American lives, it is the responsibility of a government to ensure that those people can no longer pose that threat. And if that makes us the boogeyman on our side of the house, we are more than willing to play boogeyman in order to ensure the safety and the lives of American people. We are very proud to oppose this.
Thank you very much. Have a big round of applause for all the participants. We're going to have to file our and shake hands. We'll do this a little bit differently. The judges. We're going to go to room 205. You guys stay here for a second. Although I am going to ask, if you don't mind, that the 8 participants go in the hallway as I secure the 5th ballot.
I almost didn't survive that one.
I've been alive.
Okay. My hope is that you guys don't need too much time. In this, there is no, right, there's a second, third, fourth, right, there's only a winner, right? So all you would have to do is vote for the winner. It's either the opening gov, the opening op, the closing gov, or the closing op. There's different pieces of chalk down here, and I'll drop the projection screen so it's anonymous. But I'd like you to just put a mark in the appropriate category for who you vote for. It looks to be about 20 people or so, so hopefully we'll get some sense of what you guys thought, all right? So whenever you're ready, I'm sure it'll take the judges a couple minutes, but I would like the debaters to come in here eventually. So when you're ready, please come forward and then put clearly a single mark, and then we'll go from there. Just the winner. If you don't want to, you do not have to put a mark on the board. If you don't feel comfortable, you don't feel confident, but if you listen to the whole debate, you think you've got a pretty good sense of who you would vote for, right? Let the judges do their dirty work, and you guys let your voice be heard. Democracy. So just slip behind the screen.
I'm not going to say.
Tell me. Oh, you already told me.
It's an important decision.
Super down. That makes more sense. Yeah, I just need to talk about it out loud. And then Brooke just like instantly shut me down. It was like super depressing. Brooke. Huh? I can't tell who you are. Anonymous. I want to I trust Brooke's really good anyway. Oh, it's anonymous. Okay. I'm not trying to convince her.
Anybody else? Anyone else? Anyone else?
Can this count for a video? Yeah. No one else stayed. I'm the only LME.
She did a great job. She should get extra credit.
Thank you for vouching for me. Yeah, I know. I don't know.
There we go. That's fine.
Both the teams had 6. Both teams had 6.
Sorry.
Both your teams had 6.
It's fine. It's really good.
No, but
okay, yeah, like, you yeah, like, I just wonder, like, who the first person was,
really apologize for being sorry.
and like, yeah, so I started, like, after I came back from I think it's it might be 5. I heard 5. It might be 5. Yeah, well, they tell you to do it. Yeah, it's like online. So you start to set like takes about 4 hours and they tell you to try to do it all at the time. But it's just like you stop thinking. So yeah, it's supposed to do it
Either way, it's fine. I can move the camera.
All right, is everybody here?
Pretty strong feelings toward the USC team, huh?
I'm sorry?
Got strong feelings toward the USC team.
I don't even 100% like dislike their argument. I thought it was but I have to, I gotta defend what I have to say.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Like right here.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. All right. A very, very interesting discussion. We don't know that a consensus was reached, but certainly a champion was crowned. We will announce that shortly. But please, a round of applause for yourselves and the judges. Thank you very much. The winner of the Loyola Marymount California Cup from opening government, San Luis Obispo. Please Thank you. Great job. Great job. I would now ask Loyola, UCLA, and USC, please come forward for your finalist awards. Great job. Your teammates will give you your appropriate speaker awards at some point. We'll see you all tomorrow at UCLA. Thank you very much. Or we'll see you at Cinco down the street. Thank you very much for your attendance, and thank you for
Thank you. Okay, that's a print.